Hello everyone, I'm Philip Barlow and we are here at Addison Ripley for a little talk about Isabel Manalo's show in the gallery called To Grow a Life, and I'll turn it over to Isabel to say hello.
Hi everyone, I'm Isabel, as Philip has so graciously introduced. Thanks for listening. We're just going to talk about this current body of work, To Grow a Life. And Philip has so generously offered his time to be at the gallery today. It's May 28, 2022. It's the last day of the show. The show opened on April 23, Saturday. And yeah, here we are.
Okay, well, we'll just start out with some general questions. So tell us about the show, what to grow a life,
Okay. So this body of work I was making all last year, 2021, and I was, again, we all know that the context was this horrible pandemic. My father also passed away in 2020, not due to COVID, but right at the height of the pandemic. So that was a loss. My daughter Bella went to college this past fall, so it kind of germinated from these losses of people who are close to me, although Bella's still in my life. She's in California, which is pretty far away. So I wanted to focus on my kids, and my kids have always been a part of my work, but they're now more present. In terms of life, I also was thinking of plants and foliage and flowers, and kind of seeing it as a metaphor for life. I mean, it's literal, but it's also the juxtaposition of my girls with the plants and flowers was, again, an homage to my role as a mom, a mother, a parent to them. And as I say in my statement, I feel like being a mother to them, especially at this time of their life and at this important time of Corona, makes, it's become ever more impactful. And I wanted to kind of depict that in these paintings for this particular show.
So there are several pieces in the show where your daughters are clearly identifiable.
Mm-hmm.
We can tell that's they are the models for the pieces.
Yes.
It feels like to me, even though maybe you've used them before, it's never been so out front in your work. Is that the case? Or?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So before, they've always been abstracted. So in my first show here in 2007, I believe, the title of the show was Once Upon, which you were at. The figures were very abstracted within the escape, and it was very much just kind of like allusions to them. And now they're definitely more, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're growing up, and now they're teens, and they're now like adults, practically, young adults. And I know them as these human beings that I really care about. So I think that had a lot to do with my wanting to render them more specifically.
And how do they feel about being included in your work? Is it exciting for them? Are they anxious?
I think they like it. Sophia just left, but she seems to be okay with it, as long as I'm depicting them in a way that's positive and to their liking. I don't ask approval. I just say, "Oh, I'm painting."
I guess the joy of being a parent.
That's right. Yeah, I just do it. They just have to accept it. No.
Okay. One of the things about your work, I think your work has always been, it feels like all of your work always has some elements of representation and some elements of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the balance is a little bit off, but even the things, different.
Yeah.
But even the things that you call abstract, I feel like there are elements of representation in them, and the things that are more representational, there are elements of abstraction in them. That's an intentional thing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely not one to have the patience to be a realist at all. Even if I wanted to be, I think anyone can train themselves to be technically proficient, to depict something hyper realistically. I really believe that as a teacher. I think that can be taught. if you have the will to do that. I think that in terms of like understanding how you want to express something more like diluted or like kind of like, you know, through like levels of translation, I think that is more of a conceptual approach. And I've always been interested in more of a conceptual process, not about the labor of like translating something from illusion or towards illusion. So yeah, so I've always been interested in that kind of liminal space between representation and abstraction. Just because I think there's more, at least for me in terms of paint, there's more magic in it. And there's more like tactile, you know, pleasure as a painter in doing it from that perspective. So, yeah.
I read on your website that you like to incorporate current events into your work.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, about, you know, how you do that? And
Right.
because I was wondering whether that was, you know, you tended to do that for political reasons or cultural reasons, or maybe just to set the work in a particular time?
Yeah. I guess, I mean, I think all artists also kind of absorb, you know, what's happening around them in their milieu, but, and some do it more topically, like, and some do it more politically. There was a point in my life, I forgot which body of work it was, but I was actually taking images from a newspaper, from scenes of tragedies, and then I would like do remember with all the white negative space, that body of work?
Mm-hmm.
So that was very specific to like events that were like like I did a painting that was about Fukushima, for example, or Chernobyl, or like the forest fires in California. So those were definitely like a commentary on natural or human-made disasters that were happening around the world, and that were happening either like at that time or like recent history. The last body of work, maybe the last two, I mean, in terms of current, and you know, for me, it's like identity politics, or just dealing with anything with to do with one's identity, is something that can be considered as something ever present. There's like, okay, well, wait till that goes by. There's fun. Now you can get the milieu of Georgetown. Anyway, so going back to what I was saying about my work, so when I incorporated the Baybayin, for example, which is the pre-colonial script of the Philippines, that was pre-colonial, which is like pre-Magellan. However, a lot of Filipino Americans are trying to figure out like what is our identity, and like kind of like appropriating some of those things. I don't think it's cliche. I had a gallerist once tell me in Manila she thought it was cliche that I was doing that, and I don't. I think like if you're like removed from that particular culture that people say that that's who you are, it's my way of trying to understand like what was that in my history. And so I did incorporate a lot of that in the last show. As of these pieces, I feel like, again, it's more of like a reaction to like the negativity of Corona, of like the war in Russia or in Ukraine, and the violence against, you know, Black people ongoing, especially heightened by the murder of George Floyd. I just feel like I didn't want to necessarily depict the horrors of our reality, and instead I went the other direction and said I want to protect my kids, right, and create this environment that was protection, that was like not about that threat at all. So just because of the anxiety that I feel. So I guess this is my way of like dealing with that anxiety as a mother. Does that make sense to you?
Well, as neither an artist nor a mother, you know.
You're not? You're a parent though to a lot of artwork.
Yes, I am.
Yes, we all know your collection is quite extensive.
But yes, it is. But you know, it's including some of your work.
I know. Thank you.
But you know, so I have seen your work
Mhm.
over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And one of the things, you know, I will admit that I don't know much about the creative process of making artwork. There's a reason why I'm not an artist, is because I can't do it even if I wanted to, and because I don't know how.
I think
But-
you could. I think
But you know, you talk about this as a body of work,
Mm-hmm.
and you talked about previous bodies of work. Do you go into thinking that, you know, I have an idea, you know, a big conceptual idea, and I'm going to do a number of pieces that draw on that idea, or is describing them as a body of work
Right.
something that just helps you sort of categorize and
Mhm.
you know and
Yeah,
organize
no,
the work?
I mean, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, like what comes first? Is it the idea or is it the process? And then, like, do you like work towards that idea, or do you like kind of like encapsulate what's happening in the studio and say, okay, this is going to be my show? But I think for art, like for everybody, it's different. And I can't speak for all artists because we all kind of work in a different way, conceptually and like, you know, process-wise, materially. I think for me, just because my life was so insane, like the last few years, it was helpful for me to have a particular idea to work towards. And that idea was then you work with whoever's putting on the show. And so in this case, it's Romy and Christopher Addison, and Romy Silverstein, so Romy's the director and Christopher Addison is the gallery owner. And you're, you know, kind of throwing around ideas. And so for me, it helps to have like an idea. And then it was also driven by like what was happening, like with my experimentation in the studio. So yeah, the last show was Adrenaline, which was all like a lot of abstraction, large scale abstraction, a lot of like mixed media with latex paint and enamel and acrylic, and focusing on the script. And so taking some of those elements, but then knowing that I wanted to scale it down. So you think about the space as well. So there's a lot of like design aspect involved, like how do you respond to the particular space that you're going to be showing some of the work. But yeah, for me, I already knew that I wanted to have like the same palette, like the color was really like, I'm still driven to like really bright, vibrant color, using complementary colors, or just like tones, different tones of secondary, tertiary colors. But yeah, it's, yeah, for this particular work, it was like, I have this idea, and I wanted to have like the girls more present, represented.
And so, in practical terms, do you tend to work on the pieces one at a time, or do you work on? I mean, were you working on all of these at the same time, and then going back to them? And
yeah, no, I usually work on like 4 or 5 at a time, and then that probably is why they all like have the same vibrancy too, because I have the same palette out, and then I'm like going from one painting to the next. So yeah, I like working on more than one piece at the same time. Just yeah, and it allows that like each painting to just kind of like rest and let it bake, and then that's how I, you know,
do you
go
also
back with fresh eyes.
do you also find connections between, you know, if you were working on this one and this one at the same time? Do you build? I mean, is
I
there
do.
some?
Yeah, that's a great question. This one you can't see the audience, but maybe the camera can be picked up and then like pointed towards her. Or, I mean, anyway, like this one has like, you know, a spider, in the lower left,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I start to look at, and then it has the same pink. Do you see that over there?
Right.
So then I'm like, oh, I want to see that pink here as well. But I think this time, or even now in the current work I'm doing, I'm using like a lot of pink and green, which in the 80s was very like kind of preppy, but it's not. Like that's not what I'm thinking.
I certainly don't see preppy in this
Oh,
one.
thanks. No, but I don't know. There's something about pink and green that I'm really like drawn to, and orange. Yeah, and then just creating more like these additive and subtractive marks in my work. But yeah, they do speak to each other. Definitely. So can I ask you something? Is that okay?
So yes, I guess so.
So having known my work for a while, and you've collected from a few bodies of work, I'm always like curious, like what do you try to see or understand as a collector, like when you're looking at people's like evolution?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I like about the way that Lisa and I collect, is that we focus on local artists and we know the vast majority of artists whose work we collect, and we get to see their work over time. So,
right.
So like when I look at your work that we have at home, I see the image there, but then I see how it fits in with your overall body of work. I'm like, oh, this was before this.
Right.
So that's very important to me to be able to develop that. And so that's so. But your work is very interesting in that I can go back. I can think back to, because I mean, how many shows have you had here?
5.
5 shows here,
Yeah.
and I saw your work even before then.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I can go back and look at the work that we have and remember your other work. And I mean, this is very different.
Yeah.
But it's at the same time, I can feel the elements, and maybe if I saw this work, without knowing who it was, then maybe I wouldn't necessarily go, oh, that's Isabel. But,
Right.
But I don't know, maybe I would. But I can see, I can see stuff in here that resonates with what you were doing earlier.
Right.
But you're expanding and building on it, I think. So
definitely.
That's the kind of, I mean, that's kind of what that's kind of the way we tend to look at art, is to see how the work has progressed.
Got it. And how it's changed.
And some artists, they're all very different in how they do it. I mean, some work in ways that it's very obvious it's them, but you can still see a development in the work.
Right.
Yours grows, I think, in a different way. Because again, this looks very different than the work that you did
3 years ago.
But you can see enough elements in it to show that the way that it passes, the way that your work is evolving and growing over time, and it's more than just that your daughters are getting older.
Right. Yeah, there is. I mean, I think one of the things, that's a really good point, because when I'm making these like formal decisions, like going back to the shapes of like pinks and greens and oranges, like where I place them, it's like, I don't know, I feel myself like saying, okay, I want it here and here, and like there's like certain things that are innate in our like sensibilities as artists, where you can probably trace the same kind of patterning or whatever placement of shapes to like the first time I was making paintings. So there is, and some artists strive to like get rid of that. I try to, like, that is like my mark, so to speak, or the way that I make certain placements of shapes, that to me is like my way to keep a degree of continuity.
One of the things that I think that that would give me a very strong signal that as I see your work grow, that if I didn't, if I walked into this show and there was no way to know that it was your work, is it feels like some of the structure, some of the structure is sort of the underlying structure of the piece is very similar over time, even though it looks different.
That's right. Good. Well, thank you for that. Well, do you have any other comments or questions?
Well, I do. I am. One of the things that I like about you is that while you are an artist, you are not just an artist. You, I think, are one of those people who tries to do a lot to make this an art community. So you've done a lot of things over the past that in addition to being a full-time artist. And I appreciate that kind of stuff, and I want to recognize that, but find out. I know this is not the greatest time to try to do a whole bunch of stuff while we're in the middle of the pandemic. It doesn't ever seem to want to go away.
I know.
But do you have anything that you are currently working on or planning to work on?
Funny you ask. And I think Philip's referring to the studio visit, among other things. I mean, I was also on the board with you at DCAC, which, that was so much fun. I think still DCAC is like such a great organization and art space in Adams Morgan. But in terms of the studio visit, I did put it on hold because I was teaching full time. I was working with Cheryl Edwards, who, I'm so honored to have worked with her to archive a lot of the older African American artists in the DMV area. And so that again got kind of put on hold. We maybe featured 5 different artists, and now now that I'm not teaching full time, I'm able to devote more energy to that again. So I'm hoping to kind of launch it with definitely my own personal visits. So in the past, I involved a lot of different artists doing the visits for me, and it got a little bit hard to manage in terms of my end, and I missed actually doing the interviews myself. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to try to do my own studio visits in the flesh, if they are willing, and then writing the articles, which I love to write. So that's another part of me that I feel like that's my artistic kind of energy imperative.
And what was the first non-artist thing you did for the studio visit?
The first non-artist thing? What do you mean?
Studio visit interview that was not with an actual artist.
Oh, well I did you. That's right. Oh yeah, Philip was featured, of course, as a collector. Oh yeah, and then and I had you speak at one of my classes at AU.
Yes.
That was awesome. Yeah, you were, oh my gosh. I mean, we all should be lucky to have you speak about your collection. The whole, paper, I don't know, what you have it on Excel or something.
Yes.
Amazing. But that's how you are. You're very analytical. It's so impressive. But so I have you, and then I also featured Christopher. I interviewed Jack Rasmussen at the Katzen. I should do more. Yeah, I mean, you all are out there. I'm gonna try to get you now.
All right. Well, is there anything that you wanted to tell us that I did not ask?
Yeah, come and patronize the local arts. I mean, I'm not saying don't buy my art. No, please. We're artists are hard workers, as you know, and those who are actively trying to share their work. That's the kind of artist that I also love to work with. In terms of the studio visit, is if you're actively trying to work with your own process, trying to share it, trying to make a career out of it. Those who can afford it, support your art. Local. I mean, it's important to create this kind of community.
Yes,
And
I would second that. I will say, it's very important. I think it's very important for a society to have art in it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the way we continue to be able to have art in society, is to support it.
Yes.
And so, I encourage people to partake in the arts to the maximum extent that you can.
Agreed. And the cool thing is, here in Washington, we all support one another. I like to, when I can, buy art from other artists. And other artists have done that with me as well. So it's not just like the art collector, it's like other artists who are supporting one another, and that's important too. So,
All right.
thank you for speaking with me today, Philip.
Well, thank you, Isabel.
Always good
This
to
has
see
been
you.
fun. Yes.
Yeah, and we're like social distance, so we're safe. Bye, everybody. Stay
Bye.
tuned.